His lips were blue. That's what I remember most. Not the blood on his pillow, not the dark bruises blooming across his chest like storm clouds gathering under pale skin. It was the color of his lips, the same lips that used to whisper goodnight to me, that had promised in sickness and in health just 3 years earlier, that told me something was very, very wrong. My name is Rose Matthews, and by the time the doctors gave us the word, aplastic anemia, it was already almost too late. Jordan, my husband of 3 years, the man I planned to grow old with in our little house in Tucson, was dying. His bone marrow had simply given up, stopped producing the blood cells that kept him alive. And there was no cure unless we found a bone marrow donor. A perfect match. But Jordan had no family, no records, just fragments from a childhood spent bouncing between foster homes across Maryland and Virginia. I was a trauma nurse at Mercy Medical Center. I knew how to fight death in sterile hospital rooms. I knew how to keep people breathing when their bodies wanted to quit. But nothing in my 8 years of training prepared me for the desperation that would follow. Nothing prepared me for how close I came to burying the man I love, or for the miracle that came from the last place I expected, a stranger in a forgotten Pennsylvania town who looked exactly like him. Before we dive deeper into this story, do me one quick favor. Hit like and subscribe. It helps more than you know. So many people miss the next part just because they didn't tap that button. And trust me, you don't want to miss how this ends. Now, back to that October morning when I noticed the blood and everything began to unravel. The first time I saw blood come out of Jordan's nose, I thought he was just exhausted. We'd been juggling impossible schedules for months. He worked the overnight shift at the Port of Baltimore, managing cargo logistics and coordinating with shipping companies from around the world. I was pulling double shifts as a trauma nurse, covering for colleagues who'd quit during the pandemic burnout that still lingered in 2023. Our conversations had become ships passing in the hallway. Quick kisses. Hurried, how was your day? Exchanges over reheated takeout. We kept promising ourselves it was temporary, just until things settled down. Just until we could afford the down payment on a bigger house. Just until life gave us room to breathe. Jordan brushed off the nosebleed with that lopsided grin I'd fallen in love with. He grabbed a paper towel, tilted his head back, and told me he just needed more sleep. Maybe some vitamins. Maybe a vacation we couldn't afford. But the bleeding didn't stop. Over the next 2 weeks, I watched my husband transform into a stranger. The nosebleeds came daily, sometimes twice. Then came the bruises, deep, purple splotches on his arms and chest that made no medical sense. No bumps, no falls, no reasonable explanation. Just appearing overnight like dark flowers blooming under his skin. He started sleeping 14 hours a day. When he was awake, he moved like he was walking through water. His hands shook when he tried to button his shirts. His voice became thin and reedy, like wind through autumn leaves. I made him an appointment with our family doctor, Dr. Sarah Chen, who we'd seen maybe twice since our wedding. She took one look at Jordan and ordered blood work. Extensive blood work. The results came back on a Tuesday. I was finishing a particularly brutal shift, 3 car accident victims, 2 overdoses, and a construction worker who'd fallen from scaffolding, when my phone buzzed. Rose, it's Dr. Chen. Can you and Jordan come in tomorrow morning? First thing. The tone in her voice made my stomach drop. In trauma nursing, you learn to read voices. You learn the difference between concern and alarm. This was alarm. Dr. Chen's office felt smaller than I remembered. Fluorescent lights hummed overhead. Motivational posters about healthy living seemed to mock us from the walls. Jordan sat beside me, his hand in mine, both of us cold despite the October warmth. The blood work shows some significant abnormalities, Dr. Chen began. She had Jordan's file open on her desk, multiple pages covered in numbers and medical terminology that I recognized, but hoped I was misunderstanding. Your platelet count is dangerously low. Your red blood cell count is critically low. Your white cell count suggests your immune system is compromised. I need to refer you to a hematologist immediately. She called ahead to Johns Hopkins. We had an appointment that afternoon with Dr. Michael Rodriguez, one of the best blood specialists in Baltimore. The drive to Hopkins was silent except for the radio playing softly in the background. Jordan stared out the passenger window at the city we'd called home for 5 years. I kept glancing at him, memorizing his profile, the way his dark hair curled just behind his ears, the freckle on his left temple that appeared every summer. I was already losing him, and I didn't even know what we were fighting yet. Dr. Rodriguez was younger than I expected, probably my age, with kind eyes behind wire-rimmed glasses. He explained that Jordan would need a bone marrow biopsy to confirm the diagnosis. The procedure was scheduled for the following day. That night, I researched aplastic anemia until my eyes burned. I read medical journals, patient forums, treatment protocols, survival statistics that made my chest tighten with each percentage point. Aplastic anemia occurs when your bone marrow stops producing enough blood cells. Sometimes it's caused by chemotherapy or radiation. Sometimes by viral infections. Sometimes by exposure to toxic chemicals. Sometimes it just happens. No reason. No warning. No explanation. The only cure is a bone marrow transplant from a compatible donor. After the biopsy confirmed Dr. Rodriguez's suspicions, we sat in his office again, this time with a transplant coordinator named Patricia Williams. She was a woman in her 50s with gray hair and gentle hands who specialized in helping families navigate the complex world of organ donation. The good news, Patricia said, is that aplastic anemia is very treatable with the right donor. The challenging news is that we need to find that donor. She explained the process. First, they would test Jordan's immediate family members, parents, siblings. The closer the genetic relationship, the higher the likelihood of compatibility. I don't have any family, Jordan said quietly. I was in foster care from age 2. Never knew my birth parents. No siblings that I know of. Patricia nodded without surprise. She'd clearly heard this before. We'll start with the National Registry. Be the match, international databases. We cast the widest net possible. Over the next month, as Jordan grew weaker, I became obsessed with the search. I called registries in Canada, the UK, Germany, anywhere that maintained bone marrow databases. I learned about HLA typing, histocompatibility, and the intricate genetic puzzle that needed to align for a successful transplant. The statistics was sobering. For patients without family donors, the chance of finding an unrelated match ranged from 70% for Caucasian patients to as low as 23% for patients of mixed ethnicity. Jordan was adopted with no information about his ethnic background, which made predicting his chances impossible. Every test came back the same, no match. Jordan started requiring blood transfusions twice a week. His weight dropped 20 pounds. He quit his job because he could barely walk from our bedroom to the kitchen without becoming winded. I took a leave of absence from the hospital to care for him full-time. We applied for disability benefits. We started making the kind of plans no couple should have to make. But I wasn't ready to give up. Not yet. 3 months into our search, something happened that changed everything. I was finishing a shift at Mercy. I'd returned to work part-time to maintain our insurance, when I stopped by the staff break room to grab coffee before heading home. 2 members of the evening custodial staff were chatting by the vending machines. I recognized one of them, a woman named Masha who'd worked at the hospital for over a decade. She was talking to a newer employee, a younger man whose name I didn't know. I swear, it's like looking at a ghost, Masha was saying. My sister lives up in Millersville, Pennsylvania. You know? Little farming town about 2 hours north of here. And there's this guy who works at the hardware store who looks exactly, and I mean exactly, like that actor from the superhero movies. What's his name? Chris something. The younger man laughed. Chris Evans? Captain America. That's the one. But this isn't just a resemblance, you understand. This is like someone cloned the man. My sister took a picture at a community barbecue last summer, and when she showed it to me, I thought she was pulling my leg. I don't know why I interrupted. Maybe it was desperation. Maybe it was the nurse in me who'd learned to pay attention to strange coincidences. Maybe it was just the faintest whisper of hope. Excuse me, I said. Did you say Millersville? Could I see that picture? Masha looked surprised but pulled out her phone. She scrolled through her photos for a moment, then handed it to me. Hey, this was at the Volunteer Fire Department fundraiser. My sister's right there in the pink shirt, and the guy I'm talking about is behind the grill. I looked at the screen and felt the world tilt. There, standing behind a barbecue grill with a beer in one hand and a spatula in the other, was a man who looked exactly like Jordan. Not similar, not reminiscent. Exactly like Jordan. The same dark hair with the slight wave. The same strong jaw. The same nose. The same build. Even the way he stood, with his weight shifted slightly to his left foot, was identical to my husband's habitual posture. Marcia said, "You okay? You look like you've seen a ghost." I stared at the photo for another long moment, then handed her phone back with trembling hands. "What did you say his name was?" "Luke. Luke Morrison, I think. Works at Morrison Hardware. His family's owned it for generations." I called in sick the next day and drove to Millersville without telling Jordan. I needed to see this man for myself before I said anything. I couldn't bear to get Jordan's hopes up if this turned out to be nothing more than a cruel coincidence. Millersville was barely a town, more like a collection of old farmhouses and businesses clustered around a single main street. Rolling hills stretched in every direction, covered with cornfields that had been harvested for the season. The kind of place where everyone knew everyone, where strangers were noticed immediately. I stopped at a gas station and showed the attendant a photo of Jordan on my phone. "Haven't seen him around here," the young man said, studying the picture. "But he looks familiar. Maybe try the hardware store down the street. Morrison's place. They know everybody." Morrison Hardware occupied a converted barn on Main Street. The kind of store that sold everything from screws and bolts to gardening supplies and fishing tackle. A bell chimed when I walked in, and the smell of sawdust and metal filled my nostrils. "Help you find something?" I turned toward the voice and nearly dropped my phone. Luke Morrison was restocking shelves near the back of the store, his back to me. But when he turned around, I was looking at my husband. Or rather, a version of my husband who'd grown up in small-town Pennsylvania instead of Baltimore foster homes. Same face, same build, same eyes, Jordan's warm brown eyes that crinkled slightly at the corners when he smiled. "I'm sorry," I stammered. Are you Luke Morrison?" He nodded, concerned by my obvious distress. "That's right. Everything okay?" I pulled out my phone and showed him Jordan's photo. "Do you know this man?" Luke stayed at the screen for a long moment. His face went pale. That's me, isn't it? I mean, that's not me, but that's my husband," I said. "His name is Jordan Matthews." We sat in the back office of Morrison Hardware while I told Luke everything. About Jordan's diagnosis, about our failed search for a donor, about the photo from the barbecue that had led me here. Luke listened without interrupting, his expression growing more serious with each detail. When I finished, he was quiet for a long time. "I was adopted," he said finally, "right out of the hospital when I was 3 days old. Never knew anything about my birth parents. The Morrisons couldn't have children, and they gave me everything I could have wanted. Good home, good education, took over the family business when Dad retired." He paused, staring at Jordan's photo again. But I always felt like something was missing. Like there was another part of me out there somewhere. I used to dream about having a brother when I was little. Drove my parents crazy asking if I had any siblings. I felt tears building in my eyes. "Would you be willing to get tested? Just to see if you might be compatible?" Luke didn't hesitate. "Of course. When can we do it?" I called Dr. Rodriguez from Luke's office. He agreed to expedite the testing process, understanding the urgency of Jordan's condition. Luke could drive down to Baltimore the next day for blood work. "One more thing," Luke said as I prepared to leave. "I found something a few years ago when we were cleaning out my adoptive mother's attic. She passed in 2019, and we were going through her personal papers." He opened an old cigar box on his desk and pulled out a manila envelope yellowed with age. There wasn't much in my adoption file, but she kept this. Inside the envelope was a single Polaroid photograph, faded and curling at the edges. 2 infants in hospital blankets, lying side by side in what appeared to be a nursery. No names, no identifying information. Just a date written in blue ink on the back, March 12, 1984. Jordan's birthday was March 12th, 1984. Luke drove to Baltimore the next morning. I met him at Johns Hopkins, and we went through the HLA typing process together. Blood draws, paperwork, consent forms. The whole procedure took less than an hour. How long until we know? Luke asked as we sat in the waiting room afterward. 3 to 5 days, I said. Dr. Rodriguez will call as soon as the results are ready. I drove home to find Jordan sleeping on the couch, wrapped in the blue quilt his foster mother had given him when he aged out of the system. He was so pale his lips looked gray. Each breath seemed to require tremendous effort. That night, I couldn't sleep. I kept thinking about the photograph, about the impossible resemblance, about the brother Jordan had never known he had. The call came on Thursday morning. I was making breakfast, or trying to coax Jordan into eating something, when my phone rang. Rose, it's Dr. Rodriguez. Can you come in this afternoon? Both of you. Is it good news or bad news? I asked, my heart hammering. It's good news. Very good news. Perfect match. Those were the words Dr. Rodriguez used. Not close. Not compatible. Perfect. I collapsed into the chair in his office, crying so hard my ribs ached. Jordan sat beside me in stunned silence, staring at the test results like they were written in a foreign language. This is extremely rare, Dr. Rodriguez explained. Even among siblings, perfect matches occur in only about 25% of cases. But Luke's HLA typing is identical to Jordan's across all tested markers. Luke had driven down from Millersville for the appointment. When Dr. Rodriguez explained the results, he just nodded once and said, "When do we start?" The transplant was scheduled for 2 weeks later. Luke needed time to prepare physically and mentally for the bone marrow harvest, which would require general anesthesia and several days of recovery. He stayed in our guest room during the preparation phase. It was surreal, having this stranger who looked exactly like my husband living in our house. But Luke wasn't really a stranger, was he? He was family in the truest sense. Jordan and Luke didn't talk much during those 2 weeks. Not about their shared past or the adoption or the years they'd spent living parallel lives just 2 hours apart. Instead, they seemed to communicate through shared gestures, similar habits, an almost telepathic understanding of each other's thoughts. They both liked their coffee black. They both read the sports section first. They both had the same habit of running their hand through their hair when they were thinking. They both fell asleep watching television in exactly the same position, head tilted back, mouth slightly open, hands folded across their chest. I caught them studying each other sometimes, like they were looking in a mirror that reflected not just appearance but possibility. Who might Jordan have become if he'd grown up in Millersville? Who might Luke have been if he'd ended up in foster care? The procedure took place on a Tuesday morning in November. Luke went into surgery first for the bone marrow harvest. The process involved inserting needles into his pelvic bone to extract marrow-rich blood, which would then be processed and transfused into Jordan. I waited in the family room, pacing between the coffee machine and the window overlooking the harbor. Luke's adoptive father, Robert Morrison, had driven down from Millersville. He was a quiet man in his 70s who'd raised Luke as his own son and was now watching that son risk his health for a brother he'd never known existed. "He's always been like this," Robert told me as we waited. Even as a boy, if someone needed help, Luke was the first to volunteer. Drove us crazy sometimes, how much he cared about other people. The harvest procedure took 4 hours. Luke came out of anesthesia groggy but smiling. "How much did they take?" he joked weakly. "I feel like I've been hit by a truck." An hour later, Jordan was wheeled into the transplant unit. The actual transplant was anticlimactic. Luke's processed bone marrow was transfused into Jordan through and for over the course of several hours. No surgery, no dramatic medical intervention. Just Luke's life-giving cells flowing into Jordan's bloodstream, carrying the promise of renewal. The next 3 weeks were the longest of my life. Jordan had to stay in the hospital's sterile transplant unit while his immune system rebuilt itself. Any infection could have been fatal. Luke recovered from his procedure within a week and returned to Millersville, but he called every day for updates. Sometimes he'd drive down just to sit with Jordan for a few hours, both of them watching television or playing cards in comfortable silence. Slowly, Incredibly, Jordan began to improve. His color returned first, that awful gray pallor replaced by healthy pink. His appetite came back. The shaking in his hands stopped. His voice grew stronger. 3 weeks after the transplant, Dr. Rodriguez delivered the news we'd been praying for. The procedure had been successful. Jordan's bone marrow was producing healthy blood cells. His counts were returning to normal levels. He could go home. Jordan's homecoming felt like a resurrection. He walked into our house under his own power for the first time in months. He hugged our dog, Buster, who'd been staying with neighbors. He sat at our kitchen table and ate a full meal without assistance. That weekend, Luke drove down from Millersville to celebrate. We cooked dinner together. Luke handled the grilling, naturally, and sat on our back deck as the sun set over Tucson. I found something else, Luke said during dessert. He pulled out his wallet and extracted a small piece of paper, yellowed and creased from years of folding and unfolding. It was a birth certificate. Not the amended version he'd grown up with, but an original copy that had been sealed with his adoption records and recently released by the state of Pennsylvania. Under father and mother, both entries read unknown. But there was additional information that hadn't been on Luke's amended certificate. Twin B, it read in faded typescript. Born March 12, 1984, 3:47 a.m. Weight, 6 pounds, 2 ounces. Twin B. Jordan had been twin A, born 17 minutes earlier. That was 8 months ago. Jordan returned to work gradually, starting with part-time hours and building back to full strength. I went back to my regular schedule at the hospital. Luke still visits every few weeks, and sometimes he just shows up unannounced on Saturday mornings with coffee and donuts from his favorite bakery in Millersville. Every time, Jordan greets him the same way. Hey, brother. They've started talking about their childhood now. Jordan shares stories from his years in foster care, some happy, many difficult. Luke talks about growing up in Millersville, about the parents who loved him unconditionally, about the small-town life that shaped him into the man who didn't hesitate to save a stranger who turned out to be family. We've all taken DNA tests now, confirming what we already knew in our hearts. Jordan and Luke are identical twins, separated at birth, adopted by families 150 miles apart. For 39 years, they lived parallel lives, working hard, caring for others, building quiet, decent existences, never knowing their other half was out there. Luke has been researching their birth parents, but we're not sure we want to know more. Some mysteries are better left unsolved. The important truth is simple. When Jordan needed saving, his brother was there. There are no fairy tales here. Just second chances. Just persistence. Just the miracle of a perfect match found in the most improbable place. Jordan keeps that old Polaroid, the one showing 2 infants side by side, framed on his desk at work now. Sometimes I catch him looking at it, probably wondering about those first 3 days when they were together, before life separated them. But they are together now. Not just genetically, but as brothers, as family. And if you've read this far, maybe it's time you considered something. Somewhere out there, someone might need your marrow. Might be waiting for their miracle. Might be running out of time while their perfect match goes about their daily life, unaware that they hold the key to someone else's survival. It only takes a simple cheek swab to join the registry. It takes just one match to change everything. Because sometimes the person who can save your life is a stranger. Sometimes they are a brother you never knew you had. Sometimes they are working in a hardware store in a town you've never heard of, waiting for the day when a desperate nurse drives north with a photograph and a prayer. Register. Get tested. Be someone's miracle. The way Luke was ours.